Uh, what we hope to do today is gain understanding of moral injury, its definition, differentiation from blending. It's blending with PTSD oftentimes. Briefly discuss application of moral injury to military personnel and others. This is becoming a very popular subject, by the way. Let me get that down here. I've seen different ways to look at this, but a life-threatening event, PTSD, actual event or perception of a person experiencing or witnessing an event that could happen again, internal reminders of the event, typical nightmares, flashbacks, unwelcome, intrusive, unwanted, one's feelings, his or her, or he or she is being threatened. Again, like watching a movie, you're seeing a traumatic event unfold before them again. It feels real to the victim. And then there's the avoidance of external reminders. Try not to think of the traumatic event, suppress feelings, practice avoidance of places. Altered anxiety state leads to feeling on edge, hypervigilant, exacerbated startle reflex, jumpy, anxiety, alert to threats. And the world is seen oftentimes as a dangerous place, may lead to reclusiveness, isolation, depression, questioning one's future, possibly leading to risky behavior. And there are a lot of instruments out there that help assess one's moral injury issues. And this are not moral injury, but PTSD. And I just have one for you. This is provided by the VA. They do a lot of work in this area of PTSD. And this is just the second page of that. I'm running pretty quick because I got 20 minutes. Moral injury. Moral injury is damage done to one's conscience, moral compass, or soul when that person perpetrates, witnesses, or fails to prevent acts that transgress his or her moral beliefs, values, or ethical codes of conduct. I highly recommend, if you have a chance, to look at the Syracuse University program with veterans. They have a very extensive veterans program there. And we were welcome to have William Nash back in 2012. And we've been working on this thing with moral injury in Tulsa since probably 2011, 2010, something like that. But you can see he worked on this MIE scale, and this is a very popular scale to do an assessment of moral injury. And you can see some of the questions. There's 9 questions, and there's 6 responses. And this has been used to assess moral injury with our military personnel. Now, just a point here. Let me back up. PTSD, just a quickie here. The fear triggers an alarm system in the amygdala. Adrenaline and cortisol spurt into the bloodstream. There's a hyper alertness, breathing hard, tense muscles, eyes wide open, pulse racing, triggering a reaction of fight or flight. False alarm. In bustling, crowded, and noisy supermarket, the amygdala kicks up on potential sign of danger and goes into action, not knowing that the person is no longer in a war zone. The response is the same: sweating, gasping, runs out of the store, gets in a car, panicking, slumping over the steering wheel, out of breath. Now, this is pretty extreme, but there can be degrees of this, as you know. So, and the amygdala, where is that? That's in the middle of your brain. So it's really dealing with the whole idea of trauma, a trauma situation, hyper alertness, this kind of stuff is being triggered in the amygdala. Moral injury, on the other hand, is more in the frontal lobe. It deals with values, not fear or trauma. It's not based on fear or trauma. Person has time to reflect on a values-wrenching experience and asks, did I do the right thing? Or I shouldn't have done what I did. could I have done something different? I was ordered to do something that violated my moral code, or I was personally violated in some way, rape, blame, being accused for a contested wrong. The rules of engagement. The rules of engagement were really instituted in Afghanistan through the Obama administration. Soldier says, we blew up the building, but didn't realize children were inside, killing one, injuring two others. Feeling shame and dejection, he says, I killed a child. And he can't get that out of his mind that he killed a child, even though he was in a battle situation. Soldier kills enemy combatant who fires at him. Afterward, he checks the man's pockets, only to find pictures of his parents, wife, and children. He regrets, I killed a father. Now, not everybody's going to have these reactions, but many do. And one thing we want to make out is way back in the early study of this, we see that people oftentimes will have both. On the PTSD, the startle reflex, memory loss, fear, flashbacks. On the moral injury side, we've got sorrow, grief, regret, shame, which is the big issue here is shame, alienation. In both, you have anger, depression, anxiety, self-medication, insomnia, and nightmares. So what we have been advocating is to try to tease out both to see if PTSD is part of this, moral injury is part of this, because they require different strategies to deal with. I've got a video here to play, and I want you to listen for the PTSD and listen for the moral injury here.
I immediately stepped from behind my vehicle, and my Marines were already discharging their weapons towards the protesters.
Can you turn it up some?
My weapon, and
Yeah, I've got it as high as it'll go. Can you all not hear it?
fired.
Hi, could you share
There
your
you go.
computer sound?
We
Yeah, I got it there.
went and did a
You hear that better?
of the bodies.
It's still pretty soft. Here, is it okay if I go ahead and share the
Looking
video?
at the bodies,
Yeah, yeah.
They were wearing a traditional jolly bomb, white jolly bomb, and there was completely soaked with blood. And I remember I was looking at the bodies, and I'm looking for weapons. I'm looking for weapons. And I don't see any weapons. And then I look up.
Oh.
Okay, you gonna start that? Okay,
And,
it's just a short one.
I was about to open up a meal when I heard a gunshot that went over our heads from the right to the left. I immediately stepped from behind my vehicle, and my Marines were already discharging their weapons towards the protesters. I unslung my weapon, and I put the weapon up into my shoulder, and I began to fire. When everything was said and done, we went and did a reconnaissance of the bodies. We were looking for weapons. And I remember looking at the bodies, jolly bomb, white jolly bomb, and there it was completely soaked with blood. And I remember I was looking at the bodies, and I'm looking for weapons, I'm looking for weapons, and I don't see any weapons. And then I look up, and about 50 meters away from the protesters was some RPGs that were lined up against the wall. And I thought to myself, they had the capability to fire at us if they wanted to, but they didn't. So that means that they were holding a protest, a peaceful protest. And then all of a sudden in your mind, you realize that you just murdered some people. 20 minutes later, a car sped into our checkpoint area, and we discharged our weapons, and come to find out that it was innocent life again. And then another one happened. And then another one happened. By the last one, I had an occupant of the vehicle asking me, "Why did you kill my brother? We didn't do anything. We're not terrorists." I was so devastated by my commanding officer, Captain Schmidt. He came up to me and he said, "Staff Sergeant," I said, "What's wrong? What's wrong? You look a little under the weather." And I said, "Well, today's been a bad day, sir. We've killed a lot of civilians." And he said, "No, today's a good day." When he said that, I realized that I was in the wrong place. That maybe I wasn't cut out for the Marine Corps.
Okay, let's look at that. Go to the next slide. Can you get me on the next slide?
And
Yeah, let's go on. There we go. Go back one. Was that the last? Okay. Okay, I'd like to have a discussion. What do y'all think? Could you see the moral injury? Discussion, you guys?
And you're saying the moral injury is the fact that he is feeling shame and guilt about killing civilians versus the scenery and the experience itself is just the traumatic event.
Yes, I think that's one piece of it. And what terminology did he use at the very start discussing this?
I don't remember.
He used the term murdered. Once he found out that the RPGs were lined up, not in their person, and they'd killed all these people, he used the term, "We've murdered these people." So what's he thinking in his mind?
He says we, but it means I.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a sergeant. And another thing he said, we noticed that the people that we killed in the cars that came through these checkpoints were not terrorists. Well, he concluded they weren't terrorists. The people that were had stacked their RPGs away from the road. So what's going on in this man's mind? He says, "We killed a lot of people today," to his commander. The commander says, "This is a good day." He says, "We killed civilians." He said, "This is a good day." So how was the commander seeing it, and how was the sergeant seeing this? They saw it differently. Could there be a PTSD component to this in him as well?
That he was reflecting on it sometime after with such regret and intensity, seems to me that there's the PTSD there. This is a lingering feeling of shame about what he had done.
Yeah, and the moral injuries connected in there as well. Very good. Somebody else? How come the captain would have said, "This is a good day"? Where was he coming from?
The captain was probably seeing it from the standpoint of we're just accomplishing the mission and these guys are just in the way, bystanders in the way that got caught up in it. And but the soldiers seeing it as the not accomplishing the mission due to taking civilian life versus taking terrorist life.
Yeah, but they had RPGs stacked up away from the road. But they could have been used. I mean,
And from the captain's standpoint, he may have been more concerned about his own men than he was about other people outside of that. A good day to him is everybody came home, everybody sat down at the table, everybody went to their bunk that night. And for the captain, that was a good day as far as he was concerned.
absolutely. I agree with that.
I can't help but think, if he used those experiences later on and those things make him hesitate, how that could put him and others in danger. And so, I mean, that would be a concern as well.
Yeah, as a sergeant, he's got these missions he has to go on. Yeah, absolutely. That could put his troops under his command in danger. Yes.
Well, the thing he didn't say is, why did they start firing? What was it that caused them to start firing? Did they hear a gunshot? Did someone throw something at them that they thought may have been something harmful? I mean, he didn't say anything about that.
No, and I think in talking with him about this whole thing, those questions have to be given to him, at least gently talked with him out, because there's other issues involved that he did not talk about here in this video. Anybody else?
I think one thing that really struck me was the fact that he was probably an excellent Marine before this. After this, he decided that this was not something for him ever again. So he would no longer be a Marine as such.
Yeah, and he would also, like we said before, be reluctant to engage a firefight potentially in the future. Would that be a possibility? It would be a catch in his mind. Also, do you think he might dream about this at night?
And it also seems that he's got two different ethical codes and there's tremendous conflict and he's wavering back and forth. As a Marine, I know my expectations fulfill the mission. As a human being with a spirit and a soul, I realize I've caused the killing and murder of people. So I think the added injury is this constant conflict of two ethical systems and codes that are just constantly tormenting him.
And I think
Yeah, absolutely.
with-
Go ahead.
with regards to nightmares and that, I mean, it's if he's not having nightmares, it'd be kind of shocking. He's telling the story as if he was still there, so you can tell that it's very raw and he's still very emotional about the experience. So either the video was taken extremely close to the actual incident, or he's replaying it over and over and over again, whether that be in flashbacks or otherwise nightmares, night terrors, etc.
That's good. Anybody else? Well, in assessment, watch for the moral injury, not just the PTSD. They're oftentimes blended together. You have to tease them out. Come alongside. That is, listen reflectively. Listen for the moral injury. Ask questions about the moral injury. You don't have to use the term moral injury, but just talk about the concept. Explore options for getting him help. And on the right side there, you've got the hidden language of moral injury. The term, I regret that I'm ashamed for what I did or didn't do. I can't tell anyone about it. I don't deserve. I'm not the same afterward. No one really understands. If I could redo this, I would do this a different way. Or just sitting there in silence and not talking. These are some terms that we put together in our group here working on moral injury in Tulsa. that can be asked. You listen to the person and you speak using some of these terminologies. And also, I'd like to say that professionals are affected. Social workers, therapists, child welfare workers. I do some work with child welfare, teachers, medical personnel. You understand the medical profession has significant suicide these days. First responders, police, and religious. In fact, all of us can have issues with moral injury. Would you all agree with that? I've talked to police, and this whole thing. I think police chaplains need to be trained on how to look at this with police officers, how they're doing. Okay. Any questions there? Getting help. Veterans struggle with self-forgiveness. To forgive self would mean condoning one's actions. 2, subverting the need for punishment. 3, interfering with the need to feel unworthy and non-deserving of forgiveness. And if you read a lot of the literature about treatment, forgiveness is a big issue. These people have to deal with forgiveness, begin to let go of what has happened. Families and friends don't understand their veterans when they return from war. Survival there depended on adrenaline to keep them alive, along with paranoia, hypervigilance, aggressiveness, sleeplessness. It kept them alive, but it's a different story when they get home. And many families cannot understand this. And some of the therapies out there, the VA, of course, started with cognitive processing therapy, exposure therapy came along. Group therapy has always been there. And EMDR is one of the later therapies utilized by the VA. And I remember listening at the Zaro Symposium, Nancy Bernardi, who is the veteran of a lot of these programs, her committee is, she says, we have found that writing exposure therapy is one of the best things out there. They get together in groups, they write their stories, they write all the raw details, and they speak and talk to each other about them. And then there's some good information in there about adaptive disclosure, which is a book by some of the leaders in this, Nash and Shea and others. And it includes writing and telling a story as well. The empty chair technique of dealing with this, apportioning blame, and self-forgiveness are big issues in this. Trying to get, there we go. If you go on YouTube, there are a lot of stories or videos of veterans. One of them, if you look, here is this is the one you saw today. This is a Medal of Honor winner who left some soldiers behind. His grandfather had taught him, you can't do this. Marine talks about killing teenagers. Medic returns from war. This is an Oklahoma man, a medic in the military, and what he saw and experienced. And then you get in, here's one on physician burnout, depression, moral injury, and suicide. And then moral injury and child welfare workers is another one here. So, did we do it in 20 minutes? Pretty fast.
You're close. You're close.
Does anybody have any other comments about any of this?